A maid from Mississippi named Abilene closes from work and looks really tired on the bus home. As there appears to be a civil rights movement happening in the state, the bus driver stops the bus and tells all the black people to get down. This leaves Abilene shocked, and as she wonders what's happening, she hears that a black person has just been killed up ahead, with all fellow blacks in the area now also in danger of being killed. A few weeks earlier, Abilene arrives at work to take care of her boss's daughter, May Mobley. While she's at it, her boss, Elizabeth, seems more concerned about getting her maid to start preparing the meals for her guests, who will soon arrive for a bridge club meeting. Elsewhere, a lady named Skeeter arrives at a newspaper publishing company to get a job as a writer. When she meets the editor, he looks impressed by her qualifications, but he says the only role available is for Skeeter to take the cleaning advice column. Even though it's far from what she expected, Skeeter agrees to do it because she just loves writing. After a while, some guests start arriving at Elizabeth's house, with the first ones being a lady named Hilly and her mom, Mrs. Walters. They also came along with their maid, Minnie, who is friends with Abilene. A few hours later, Skeeter arrives and greets Hilly, Elizabeth, and their other friends. They then head to a table to talk and play games. While at the table, Skeeter mentions that she just got a job. Her friends seem happy for her, and she also says she'd like Abilene's help with the column since it's about cleaning advice. Elizabeth asks why she can't just get help from her maid, Constantine, but Skeeter says she already quit. Elizabeth feels sorry for her and says she doesn't mind letting Abilene help Skeeter as long as it doesn't affect her work. Just then, a call comes in, and as Abilene picks up, it turns out to be a lady named Celia. She asks to speak to Elizabeth, but Abilene says she's not around. She also asks if Abilene knows any maid who could be interested in a job at her house, but she says she doesn't know any. After the call ends, Elizabeth asks who it is, and as Abilene says it's Celia, Hilly doesn't look happy. However, Elizabeth assures her that she has never returned any of Celia's calls. It then turns out that Hilly has turned all the ladies in the neighborhood against Celia because of her recent marriage to one of Hilly's exes named Johnny. Just then, Elizabeth notices that Hilly wants to urinate, so she tells her to use the toilet. Hilly says she'd rather hold it in, but Mrs. Walters mentions that the real reason her daughter doesn't want to use the bathroom is because she can't use the same bathroom Abilene uses. Hilly then says she doesn't know why Elizabeth still lets Abilene use the toilets inside the house. Skeeter sees that Abilene can hear them, so she tries to change the topic, but Hilly keeps talking about how every white household should have a toilet outside the house meant for the maid's use only. She also says she's drafting an initiative to make it get adopted by law because she believes the maids always carry diseases around. After the club meeting, Skeeter meets Abilene to ask if she'll help with her cleaning advice articles. Abilene says she'll do it, and Skeeter thanks her. She also says sorry to Abilene for having to hear what Hilly was talking about. Just then, Elizabeth enters the kitchen and gives a copy of Hilly's initiative to Skeeter so she can add it to the newsletter of the paper she works for. Skeeter eventually heads home, but when she arrives, her mom, Charlotte, starts talking about how her daughter needs to dress well to find a husband. Skeeter doesn't seem interested in the conversation, so she just walks away. Later that night, at dinner, Skeeter's brother, Carlton, jokes about how his sister is writing for the cleaning column. Their dad, Robert, says it's not a bad thing and that he's proud of Skeeter. Just then, Skeeter asks about Constantine, and Robert says she just left to stay with her family in Chicago. Skeeter doesn't believe this, and she asks if her mom fired the maid. Charlotte says she didn't, and that Constantine just decided to move on. Skeeter doesn't like Charlotte's tone, and she says she can't believe her mom would speak so poorly of someone who raised her child. As she gets angry, she leaves the house and goes to the garden. There, she remembers how Constantine supported and encouraged her never to listen to what bullies say to her. The next day, she then calls a woman named Mrs. Stein, who runs one of the biggest publishing companies in the country. In the rejection letter she recently received from Stein, Skeeter is told that she needs to find something she's passionate to write about. As she's speaking to Stein on the phone, Skeeter mentions that she already knows what to write about. She says she'd like to write about black maids and how they're treated by white families. Stein says the book will only make sense if she gets maids to share their story, and Skeeter says she already has someone she can interview. Following this, Stein says she'll be willing to give Skeeter a chance if her first draft comes out well. The next day, while Skeeter is getting Abilene to help her with the cleaning column, she asks if the maid would love to share her story for the book she's planning to write. Abilene thinks it's too risky because it's against the laws in Mississippi, so she says she's not interested. As Skeeter tries to convince her, she just walks inside. There, she hears Elizabeth's husband arguing about his wife's sudden decision to build a toilet for Aibileen outside the house. He doesn't seem to like the idea, but Elizabeth continues to disturb him about how it would benefit them. As he eventually walks away after seeing Skeeter, Elizabeth tells her friend that she's not sure her arrangement with Aibileen can continue. The next day, Aibileen finally gets a toilet of her own, with Elizabeth then leaving her with May as usual. Elsewhere, Minnie gets very pressed at Hilly's house, and even though Mrs. Walters tells her to use the bathroom, Hilly says it's better for her to go outside in the rain. Despite this, Minnie sneaks into the bathroom to use it, but she eventually gets caught and fired by Hilly. The next day, as a bus is about to take the maids home after work, Aibileen and Hilly's new maid, Yule, watch as Minnie gets off the bus and walks fast with a pie in her hand. Before Aibileen heads home, Skeeter shows up and talks to her about the book she wants to write, but the maid says she's still not interested. After getting home that day, Aibileen gets a call from Minnie, who says she has done something really bad that Hilly now knows about. Aibileen tries to get her to say what she did, but she doesn't say anything. The next day, Skeeter starts reading the Law of Mississippi for non-whites, which has a lot of segments preventing blacks from doing things with whites. On Sunday, Aibileen attends church and hears the pastor preaching about courage. This seems to speak to her, so she calls Skeeter to do the interview discreetly in her house. Before they start, Aibileen tells Skeeter to use different names in her book. Skeeter agrees, so Aibileen starts answering her questions. When Skeeter asks if the portrait of the boy on the wall is her son, she asks for the next question. As Skeeter then asks about her first job, Aibileen says she has already written down some things. She then brings out her diary and reads about how the first baby she raised was a boy who didn't understand why she was treated differently. The next day, Yule asks Hilly for an advance so she can pay her children's college fees. However, Hilly laughs at her and sounds rude as she says she can't give Yule anything. Since Hilly has spread lies around the neighborhood that Minnie is a thief, Aibileen suggests that she meet Celia since she's the only one her old boss might have not gotten to. As she arrives at the house, Celia looks quite excited to see Minnie. She also shows her around the house, and after a while, Minnie agrees to work there. Celia then says that Minnie will have to leave early because she doesn't want Johnny to meet the maid at the house. Minnie doesn't understand this as she thinks she might be in danger, but Celia says she just wants her husband to believe she can cook better and do everything around the house by herself. She also mentions that she's pregnant, and Minnie looks happy for her. Later that day, at a meeting with the ladies in the neighborhood, Hilly announces that her initiative is about to get to the governor's table. As she asks Skeeter why she hasn't put it in the newsletter, she says she has just been busy with many things. After the meeting, Skeeter goes to a restaurant with Elizabeth and Hilly. As they start talking, Hilly mentions that she'd like to introduce Skeeter to her husband's cousin, Stuart. Skeeter looks happy about this, and her friends also get excited for her. The next day, Yule sees Hilly's ring while she's cleaning the house, so she decides to keep it. Elsewhere, Aibileen sees that Elizabeth failed to change May's diaper after a really long time. After work, as she's being interviewed by Skeeter, Aibileen talks about Elizabeth and how she's not fit to be a mother. While they're talking, Minnie enters the house and sees Skeeter. She then complains about Aibileen's cooperation with Skeeter, who also tries to get her to join them. Even though she initially refuses to join, Minnie eventually sits down to share her story. The following day, Charlotte gets Skeeter ready for her date with Stuart. She looks quite excited about it, but as she gets there, the date doesn't go as planned, as Stuart turns out to be rude. She then insults him and leaves angrily. The next day, Minnie starts teaching Celia how to cook. After they're done, Celia sits with Minnie to enjoy her meal, even though the maid tries to get her to sit elsewhere. Later that night, Skeeter calls Stein to ask about her first draft. She says she really liked it, though she mentions that the book needs to have a dozen more stories for it to be published. As Skeeter looks disappointed because all the other maids are scared of speaking up, Aibileen begs her not to give up. She then mentions that she's actually doing it for her son, who was killed while working for a white foreman. As she also adds that her son was an aspiring writer, Aibileen says it would be her dream to see her words get printed. The next day, while at Hilly's house for a meeting, Skeeter tries to get Yule to share her story, but she says she's not as courageous as Aibileen and Minnie. Shortly after, Hilly comes in to ask why Skeeter still hasn't put her initiative in the newsletter, and she gives an excuse of being busy helping her sick mom. However, Hilly urges her to do what she can immediately. That night, when Skeeter gets home, she finally types what Hilly wants, including a charity aspect where people are expected to donate their old coats. Before Skeeter gets it sent, though, she decides to replace the coats with something else. The next day, Charlotte wakes Skeeter to inform her that Stuart is at the house to see her. Even though she's reluctant to see him, she eventually goes out to hear him apologize for being rude the other day. He also says he has never met anyone like her. As he suggests going on another date, she initially rejects him, but when she realizes that he actually feels sorry for what he did, she agrees to go out with him. While on the date, things appear to go quite well, and it ends with both of them kissing to start their relationship. The next day, Hilly gets embarrassed to see that people have donated their old toilet seats instead of coats. She realizes that Skeeter must have changed the words, and she looks really angry. Later that day, after work, Aibileen looks tired on the bus. Shortly after, the driver stops and tells the black people on the bus to get down. As someone asks what happened, the driver says a black person was just killed up ahead during the civil rights protest. Aibileen then gets down and runs as fast as possible to avoid getting killed. She falls down on her way and eventually goes to Minnie's house. When she gets there, Minnie asks if they should continue their interviews with Skeeter, and Aibileen says they'll just have to be more careful. The next day, while at work, Minnie hears Celia struggling with something inside the bathroom. She asks if anything is wrong, but Celia tells her to leave. However, Minnie gets really worried, and she breaks the door open to see that Celia has lost her baby. After returning to her room, Celia tells Minnie that she had already lost 2 babies before. She also says she doesn't know what to tell Johnny because he married her to have babies. Minnie then continues to console her, after which she says Johnny will have to get over it. The next day, Yule gets arrested just as she gets off the bus with Aibileen. After a while, Hilly then enters a restaurant and brags to her friends about how she got Yule arrested after she was caught trying to sell her ring at a pawn shop. Skeeter is also there, but she avoids looking at Hilly and her group. After a while, the waiter secretly tells Skeeter that she has to go to Aibileen's house. As she then arrives, she sees a lot of maids in the house, ready to share their stories after what happened to Yule. The next day, while Elizabeth is having a ladies' meeting at her house, Celia brings one of Minnie's pies to her. However, Hilly gets all the ladies to hide so that Celia can leave. Celia sees this and looks disappointed. When she gets home, Minnie tells her to stop taking pies to see any of the ladies in the area. As Celia asks what she did to get them to hate her, Minnie says it's because Hilly thinks Johnny cheated on her while they were still together. Celia says she did no such thing and that she'll have to speak to Minnie about it. Later that day, Minnie says she fears what will happen when Skeeter's book is published. She then mentions that she'd like some kind of insurance to ensure nothing happens to her. As Skeeter asks what she suggests, Minnie then narrates how she took a piece of pie to Hilly after she got fired. She then mentions that she actually made the pie with her feces and confessed it to Hilly, who got really angry. This leaves Aibileen and Skeeter shocked, but Minnie mentions that if the part is added to the book, Hilly will be so embarrassed that she'll try to make people believe the book is not about the maids in the town. Skeeter says she's unsure about this, but she eventually agrees to add it. The next day, Hilly organizes a benefit to promote her initiative. During the charity segment, she is announced as the highest bidder for Minnie's pie. This gets her angry because she didn't bid for anything, but Celia then hugs her from behind, saying she knows Hilly loves Minnie's pies. As she also says she thought the pie would lighten up Hilly's mood, Hilly takes it the wrong way and believes Celia is making fun of her. Celia doesn't understand this, but as she has had too much to drink, she vomits around and disrupts the event. The next day, while Celia complains about not knowing why Hilly was harsh toward her, Minnie tells her the real reason her old boss didn't like the pie gift. Later that day, Skeeter shows Aibileen and Minnie the complete draft of all the stories. As they ask if she's through, she says that Stein has asked her to write from her perspective about the maid who raised her. The following day, Skeeter asks Charlotte what really happened to Constantine. Charlotte then confesses that she fired Constantine after some of her fellow members of a group called the Daughters of America showed their displeasure at how the maid's daughter interrupted their meeting. Skeeter looks disappointed in her mom for not standing up for what she believed in. She also says she'll look for Constantine, but Charlotte tells her that after trying to get their old maid to return, they found out that she had died. Skeeter looks devastated to hear this, and she tells Charlotte that Constantine likely died because her heart was broken. Days later, Skeeter's book gets published, and she even sends part of the money she has made to everyone who shared their stories. The book turns out to be a huge success, but not everyone seems to like the book. After reading the book, Stuart breaks up with Skeeter because he doesn't believe in what she wrote about. As some of the ladies in the neighborhood also suggest that the book is about some selected people, Hilly tries to change their minds so that no one would suspect that she's the one who ate a pie made with feces. After Celia also sends her a troll message, Hilly goes to Skeeter's house to confront her while she's reading an appointment letter from Stein's company. As she gets there, she insults Skeeter and threatens to file a lawsuit against her. However, Skeeter says it would mean she's accepting that she's the character who ate shit. She doesn't like this, and as Charlotte comes outside to see them, Hilly reports her daughter to her. Quite interestingly, Charlotte defends Skeeter and sends Hilly out of her house. Skeeter looks impressed, and as they enter the house, Charlotte says she's proud of her daughter. As she also says that she knows Skeeter got a job at Stein's company in New York, she encourages her daughter to go. Skeeter looks unsure about what to do because she doesn't want to leave her mother alone, but Charlotte says she'll be fine. Elsewhere, Johnny sees Minnie as she's heading to his house. He stops her, but she runs away, thinking he wants to hurt her. When she eventually picks up a stick, Johnny tells her that Celia has already told him everything. He also mentions that he always knew his wife was not the one making the meals. Minnie looks happy, and he invites her inside. As she enters, she sees all the meals Celia has prepared for a feast to thank her. Johnny then tells Minnie that she can keep working at the house as long as she likes. The next day, Aibileen and Minnie arrive at their church, only to see everyone clapping for them. Just then, the pastor calls Aibileen to the podium and gives her a copy of Skeeter's book, which has been signed by all the members, who are proud of her. A while later, Minnie and Aibileen show the signed book to Skeeter. They also thank her for letting them have a voice. As they encourage her to take the job in New York, she says she doesn't want to leave the maids by themselves in case anyone wants to fight them for what they did. However, Minnie and Aibileen tell her to chase her dreams instead of worrying about them. The next day, as Aibileen arrives at work, Hilly is also there, and she forces Elizabeth to accuse the maid of stealing. Hilly then says that she'll be happy to see Aibileen in jail. However, the maid says it will be good for her because she'll get enough time to write more stories. She then confronts Hilly and tells her that she's a godless woman who only lies to try to get what she wants. As Elizabeth seems to support Hilly, Aibileen quits and says goodbye to May, who asks if she has found another girl to take care of. Aibileen then says that May is the last child she'll raise because she's quitting for good. May looks sad and tells her to wait, but Aibileen says she can't. As she then leaves while crying, Aibileen walks home with the intention of starting a new job as a writer so she can make her son proud wherever he is.